Grace Whitaker was behind the wheel the night Leah Quinn died, and her family sent an innocent man to prison for it. The accusation came through the ballroom speakers just as Judge Henry Whitaker raised his glass beneath a banner that read "A Lifetime of Integrity." 400 guests froze at white linen tables, their smiles suspended as if the room had forgotten what expression belonged on its face. Grace stood behind the curtain at stage left, holding the speech her father had written, while her mother tightened a hand around her wrist. "Whatever happens," Elaine whispered, "you will walk out there, smile, and protect this family." Grace felt the pressure through the silk cuff of her navy dress. On stage, Henry lowered his glass. The speakers crackled again. A younger woman's voice filled the room, breathless and frightened. "Caleb, I think I hit someone." Grace stopped breathing. She knew the voice before she understood why. It sounded like her, but younger, thinned by panic. Rain tapped against glass, followed by a man saying, "Pull over. Do not leave the car. I am coming." At the sound booth, a technician stared at the control screen. The file had been submitted that afternoon as a pre-recorded tribute from a former colleague. The recording ended. A chair scraped near the back. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped into the center aisle. Caleb Monroe had more gray in his hair than Grace remembered, but he carried himself with the courtroom calm that had once made juries trust him. He had been Henry's attorney, Elaine's confidant, and a near-permanent presence in the Whitaker home until he disappeared from their lives 18 years earlier. Caleb looked directly at Grace. "That was your voice," he said. Murmurs rolled across the ballroom. Phones rose above the tables. Near the front, a reporter lowered her microphone, already realizing that the celebration had become a scandal. Henry finally found his voice. "This event is over." He stepped away from the podium, but Caleb continued toward the stage. "No," Caleb said. "The performance is over." Elaine released Grace's wrist and moved in front of her. "Security," she called. 2 hotel security officers entered the aisle. Caleb stopped and lifted both hands, showing that he carried only a small digital recorder. "I am leaving voluntarily," he said. "But the Whitaker family has 24 hours to tell the truth about Leah Quinn, Marcus Bell, and the payment of $500,000 that purchased 18 years of silence." The room erupted into overlapping questions. Leah Quinn meant nothing to Grace, yet the name created pressure behind her eyes. Marcus Bell did not. Marcus had driven for the Whitakers when Grace was in high school. He had been quiet, dependable, and unfailingly polite. Then he disappeared, and her parents said he had taken another job. Years later, Grace found a newspaper clipping reporting his conviction in a fatal hit-and-run case. Her father dismissed it as a tragedy that did not concern her. Her mother threw the clipping away. Now Caleb was saying Marcus had confessed to something Grace had done. "Escort him out," Henry ordered. Caleb ignored him. "Grace," he said, his voice changing from public accusation to private warning. "Ask your father why your medical records from that night were sealed. Ask your mother why Marcus Bell's wife received $500,000 through a consulting company 6 weeks before his guilty plea. Ask your brother who moved you out of the driver's seat." Grace turned toward Daniel. Her younger brother stood near the family table, pale and rigid. Their eyes met, and he looked away. That frightened her more than the recording. Henry stepped close to Caleb, where the cameras could capture both men. "You are a former family attorney presenting an edited recording at a private event," he said. "Nothing you say deserves an answer." Caleb kept his gaze on Grace. "Then answer one question. Where was she on October 14th, 18 years ago?" Grace expected her father to respond immediately. Instead, Henry said nothing. Elaine reached for Grace's hand. "You were home," she said quickly. "You were sick that night." The pressure behind Grace's eyes sharpened. She saw a road shining under rain, a dashboard clock reading 11:47, a song playing too loudly, and her own hand gripping a phone. Then came a blank space, followed by the smell of coffee and her mother sitting beside a bed at sunrise. Grace had always believed it was a fever dream. "I was home," she repeated, but the words sounded borrowed. Caleb's expression softened, and that softness made her angry. "Do not look at me like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like you know my life better than I do. I know what they allowed you to remember." Elaine stepped between them. "Enough." Caleb placed the recorder on an empty table beside a vase of white roses. 24 hours, he said. After that, the full recording, The payment records and the original case file go to the Connecticut Division of Criminal Justice and every major newsroom from Hartford to New York. He turned toward the exit. Grace pushed past her mother. Why now? She called. Caleb stopped, but did not face her. Because I spent 18 years believing the truth would destroy your family, he said. Now I understand that the lie already did. He walked through the brass doors, leaving the recorder behind. Grace looked at her father, her mother, and Daniel. None of them asked what was on the rest of the recording. None of them called Caleb a liar. In that moment, Grace understood that the most terrifying thing in the room was not the accusation. It was that everyone she loved seemed to recognize it. The first lie came before the ballroom doors had finished closing. Henry ordered the audio feed cut, told hotel security to clear the room, and instructed his communications director to describe the recording as fabricated material presented by an unauthorized guest. His voice was calm again, almost judicial, as though naming the lie could make it true. Grace stood near the stage while guests filed toward the exits, whispering into phones and pretending not to stare at her. Elaine remained beside her, one hand resting lightly on Grace's elbow. From a distance, the gesture looked comforting. Up close, it felt like a warning. Do not speak to anyone, Elaine said. Not the press, not the hotel staff, and not Caleb. Grace looked toward the table where Caleb had left the recorder. It was gone. Where is it? She asked. Henry answered without turning. Secure. I want to hear the rest. There is no rest worth hearing. Henry faced her with the same expression he used in court when defendants insisted the system had made a mistake. Caleb Monroe built a career by making vulnerable people doubt themselves, he said. Tonight he used that skill on you. Daniel joined them, loosening his tie with unsteady fingers. Grace studied him. Caleb had asked who moved her out of the driver's seat, and Daniel had looked away. Did you know Marcus Bell went to prison? She asked. Daniel glanced at Henry. I learned later. I did not. You were dealing with a lot back then. Elaine stepped closer. You had barely slept for days. You were anxious, exhausted, and physically ill. Grace searched her mother's face for something solid. Was I home on October 14th? Yes, Elaine said immediately. Henry spoke at the same time. Most of the night. The difference was only 3 words, but it opened a crack in the room. Most of the night. Grace asked. Henry paused. You attended a school event earlier. Your mother brought you home. What event? Grace, it was 18 years ago. Caleb remembered the date. Because he has spent years preparing this attack. Camera flashes appeared through the frosted ballroom doors. Security led the family through a service corridor and down to the underground garage. Their black sport utility vehicle waited less than 20 feet away. Grace stopped when she saw rainwater shining across the concrete floor beneath red emergency lights. For 1 second, she was 17 again, staring through a windshield while rain moved sideways across the glass. A song played too loudly. Someone on the phone said her name twice. Then the memory vanished. Grace, Daniel said. What happened? I remembered something. Elaine's face tightened. Stress can create images that feel real. It was not an image. Henry opened the rear door. We are not discussing unreliable memories in a parking garage. During the 25-minute drive to the Whitaker estate in backcountry Greenwich, Henry spoke about issuing a public statement before midnight. Daniel sat beside Grace, looking at his locked phone. She finally asked, Did you move me? His shoulders stiffened. Move you where? Out of the driver's seat. Caleb wanted a reaction. He got one. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give tonight. At the estate, Henry gathered everyone in his library. Law books, family photographs, and awards surrounded them like witnesses selected in advance. Our position is simple, he said. Caleb stole privileged material, edited it, and used it to threaten this family. He did not ask for money, Grace said. He demanded a confession under threat of exposure. That does not make him honorable. A confession to what? Grace asked. Silence followed. Elaine sat on the leather couch. There was an accident that night, she said. Marcus was driving alone. He panicked and left the scene. Caleb briefly advised him, then became obsessed with blaming someone else. Why accuse me? Because he hates your father, Elaine replied. And because you are the easiest way to hurt him. Grace turned to Daniel. Do you believe that? He stared at the carpet. Henry interrupted. Belief is irrelevant. Evidence matters. Then show me the evidence. My medical records. The case file. The payment to Marcus Bell's wife. Elaine rose. There was no payment for silence. Was there a payment? The foundation assisted many families. $500,000 is not ordinary assistance. Henry's patience cracked. You will not interrogate your mother in my house based on the words of a vindictive man. Grace felt years of obedience gather in her chest. She had spent her life translating Henry's commands into concern and Elaine's pressure into love. Tonight the translation failed. Then I will find the records myself. Upstairs, she searched the locked file box her mother had used for private medical papers. The key was still taped beneath the desk drawer, in the hiding place Elaine had once taught both children to use. Behind old clinic invoices and school reports, Grace found a thin folder marked October. The first page came from a private clinic and was dated October 15th, 18 years earlier. She had been admitted at 2:17 in the morning with acute distress, confusion, and disrupted memory. A second page listed the emergency contact called before her parents. The number belonged to Caleb. Grace entered it into her phone. He answered after one ring. "Grace," he said. She looked toward the bedroom door, where Daniel stood watching her. "Why did the clinic call you before it called my parents?" Caleb was silent for a moment. "Because you called me first," he said. "You were still in the car, and you were asking me what to do." Daniel closed the bedroom door before Grace could ask another question. "Put the phone on speaker," he said. His voice was quiet, but the request carried the weight of a confession waiting to happen. Grace activated the speaker and placed the phone beside the clinic invoice. "Daniel is here," she told Caleb. "Good," Caleb replied. "He remembers more than you do." Daniel moved toward the window and looked across the dark lawn. "You said I called from the car," Grace said. "Where was I?" Caleb took a slow breath. "On North Lake Road, less than a mile from a diner called Millie's Place." The name touched something inside Grace. A red sign, chrome stools, a paper cup with a blue stripe. The images flashed and disappeared. "Why was I there?" "You had followed your mother." Elaine's voice echoed in Grace's memory. "You were home. You were sick. Followed her where?" Caleb did not answer immediately. Daniel turned from the window. "Do not make him tell it like he was the only person who lied." Grace stared at her brother. "Then you tell me." Daniel pressed both hands against the dresser. "Mom had been leaving the house at night. You noticed. That evening you saw her car near the country club and followed it." Grace looked at the phone. "Who was she meeting?" Caleb answered. "Me." The words settled over the room without drama, which somehow made it worse. Grace had expected corruption or a hidden legal bargain. She had not expected something so ordinary and destructive. "You and my mother were involved." "Yes." "For how long?" "Almost 2 years." Daniel closed his eyes. Grace felt anger rise, but it had nowhere to land. Caleb had vanished. Elaine had rewritten the night. Henry had built a public life around integrity. Every person involved had placed part of the truth somewhere Grace could not reach. "I saw you together," she said. "You saw us leaving a private room at the country club," Caleb replied. "You called me from your car. You were crying. You said you would tell your father everything." "Why was the call recorded?" "I had been dictating case notes in my car. The recorder was still running when I answered through the speaker." Grace touched the clinic invoice. "Then what happened?" "You kept driving while we argued. I told you to pull over. You told me never to speak to your mother again. Then I heard you react to something in the road, and the call went silent." "Say her name," Grace demanded. "Leah Quinn." She was 19. She had finished a late shift at Millie's Place and was walking toward the bus stop near the North Lake Road intersection. No picture formed, only rain, headlights, and silence on the other end of a call. "What did you do?" "I called emergency dispatch and drove toward the location you had described. I was less than 3 miles away. The storm slowed the response vehicles, so I reached you first." "Was Leah conscious?" "Yes." Caleb's voice changed. "She said my name when I knelt beside her." Daniel looked sharply at the phone. "Elaine arrived less than a minute later," Caleb continued. "She had called Daniel after you drove away. Daniel was nearby and reached the road soon after she did." Grace turned toward her brother. "What did you do?" Daniel looked ashamed. "Mom said the police would destroy your life before anyone understood what happened. She told me to move you into the passenger seat. And you did. I was 16. You were barely responding. I thought I was helping. Where was Marcus?" "He was not there yet," Caleb answered. "Henry arrived several minutes later. Marcus had driven him from the estate. Your father saw you in the passenger seat and understood what Elaine had started. He told Marcus that one statement could protect the family. Why would Marcus agree? At first, he did not. His wife needed long-term medical care. Henry promised financial security and said his legal team could secure a limited sentence. $500,000, Grace said. Paid through a consulting company controlled by the Whitaker Foundation 6 weeks before Marcus entered his plea. And the sentence. The case drew more attention than Henry expected. The court imposed a substantial prison term. By then, Marcus had committed himself to the false story, and your parents made it clear that changing it would expose his family to public ruin. Grace remembered Marcus opening the rear door for her after school and greeting her as Miss Grace. She remembered his son visiting the estate once, carrying a baseball glove. Those memories had survived while the truth around them had been erased. Why did he stay silent? Your mother met with him before the plea, Caleb said. After that, he stopped resisting. Daniel glanced toward the hallway. Keep your voice down. Grace almost laughed. Even now, inside a house built on silence, Daniel was afraid of being overheard. I want the original case file, she said. Not copies. Meet me at Millie's place tomorrow morning at 9. Come alone. Why there? Because Leah worked there, and because someone kept what the police never saw. Daniel shook his head. This could be a trap. Grace looked at him. Everything in this house has been a trap. Caleb was silent for a moment. There is one more thing you need to know. When Leah said my name on that road, it was not because she recognized me as your mother's friend. Grace gripped the desk. Then how did she know you? The steadiness left Caleb's voice. Because Leah Quinn was my daughter. Grace reached Millie's place at 8:47 the next morning and found Caleb sitting alone beneath a faded photograph of the diner from 1989. The restaurant stood beside a two-lane road bordered by wet trees and old utility poles. It had changed little except for a new gas station across the highway and fresh red paint around the windows. Grace had driven the route slowly, searching for something familiar. When she passed the turn for North Lake Road, her hands tightened around the steering wheel. She did not turn. Inside, Caleb had placed a thick brown envelope beside 2 untouched cups of coffee. He looked as if he had not slept. Grace sat across from him, but kept her coat on. You knew Leah was your daughter, she said. Yes. Before that night. For 7 years. The answer was too direct to soften itself. Caleb removed a photograph of a young woman in a diner uniform, standing beside the same counter behind him. Leah had dark hair, a guarded smile, and Caleb's eyes. Did she know who you were? Grace asked. She knew I was her father. She did not know why I had stayed away for most of her life. What reason did you give her? I told her I was protecting her from complications in my life. You mean my mother? Caleb lowered his eyes. Your mother was part of it. My career was another part. By the time Leah found me, I had become skilled at calling cowardice responsibility. An older woman approached with a coffee pot and stopped when she saw Caleb. Her name tag read Marjorie. I wondered whether you would ever come back, she said. She looked at Grace. You are the Whitaker girl. Grace nodded. I am trying to understand what happened. Understanding is easier than accepting, Marjorie said. Marjorie owned the diner now, just as her parents had when Leah worked there. She led them through the kitchen to a narrow office with gray filing cabinets and a small safe beneath a desk. From the safe, she removed a cardboard archive box sealed with yellowed tape. The police collected what Leah carried that night, Marjorie said. Her work journal and photographs were still here. Her mother asked me to keep them. Caleb later asked me to store the box somewhere Henry Whitaker would never think to look. Grace turned toward him. You had evidence. I kept records your father would have tried to control. That is not the same as giving them to the police. Caleb did not defend himself. Grace opened the box. On top lay a journal, several letters, and a photograph of Leah standing beside Caleb outside a courthouse. On the back, Leah had written, My father finally promised to tell the truth. The date was 3 weeks before the accident. What truth? Grace asked. Leah wanted me to acknowledge her publicly. She was tired of meetings in diners and parking lots. She said she would contact my firm and the person I was seeing if I refused. She did not know that person was Elaine. Not then. Grace opened the journal. The final entry described a meeting Caleb had promised to attend at 11:30 after Leah's shift. She planned to demand a decision. You were supposed to meet her here that night. Yes. Elaine asked me to see her first because she believed you had become suspicious. I chose the problem that threatened my public life instead of the promise I made to my daughter. So Leah waited. For 10 minutes. Then she left for the bus stop near North Lake Road. That was where your car reached her. Grace closed the journal. When you arrived, she recognized you. Caleb's voice became almost inaudible. She called me Dad. Disgust replaced Grace's confusion. And you still helped my family blame Marcus. Marjorie left the office without speaking. Caleb remained beside the safe, stripped of the authority he had carried into the ballroom. Henry arrived and understood the situation immediately, he said. You were confused. Daniel was frightened. Elaine was desperate. Henry said one scandal would destroy 5 lives. He said Marcus could survive a criminal charge, but you could not survive the truth. What did he say about Leah? Caleb looked at her photograph. Nothing. Everyone spoke about the living people they wanted to protect, and no one spoke about the person who no longer had influence. You were her father. Yes. You were also an attorney. Yes. And you used both roles to abandon her. Caleb accepted the words without protest. From the envelope, he removed the original police report, a payment ledger, and a signed statement from Marcus Bell. Several lines had been revised in Caleb's handwriting. You wrote this confession, Grace said. I shaped it to match the account Henry wanted presented. You shaped an innocent man into the driver. Yes. Outside the office, dishes clattered and customers spoke over low country music. Grace placed the papers back in the envelope. Why expose everything now? Marcus died believing I would clear his name. Leah's mother died last month without seeing the record corrected. Your father is awaiting confirmation to a federal appellate court, and his reputation still rests on what we buried. Those are reasons, Grace said. They are not the reason. Caleb removed a proposed settlement agreement. Henry contacted me 6 weeks ago. He offered $2 million for every remaining record and a permanent confidentiality agreement. You refused. Not immediately. I authorized my attorney to negotiate. Grace stared at him. You considered selling the truth again. Yes. Caleb placed another document beside the file. Then Marcus's son, Ethan, sent me this. He found the original among his father's belongings. It was a copy of a letter addressed to Ethan. Marcus wrote that Elaine had threatened to tell Ethan, while he was still a child, that his father had caused Leah's death and abandoned her unless Marcus accepted the official story. Grace finished reading and looked toward the doorway. Elaine stood there, perfectly composed, holding her car keys. That letter was written for his son, her mother said. It was never meant for you. Elaine closed the office door and looked at the letter in Grace's hand, as if it were a family document left carelessly in public. Marcus wrote that for Ethan, she said. Not for Caleb, and certainly not for you. Grace placed the copy beside Leah's journal. He wrote that you threatened to make his son believe he was responsible. I told Marcus what would happen if conflicting stories reached the press. Children hear cruel versions of complicated events. I was trying to spare Ethan from that. You made Marcus accept a crime he did not commit. Marcus made a choice. Elaine's answer came without hesitation, polished by 18 years of repetition. Caleb stepped away from the safe. You promised to protect his family only if he followed the statement Henry approved. Elaine looked at him with contempt. You drafted that statement. Do not stand beside my daughter and pretend you merely watched. Caleb said nothing. Grace understood that her mother had come prepared to divide responsibility until no single person appeared guilty enough to condemn. How did you know I was here? Grace asked. Elaine placed her keys on the desk. Daniel told me you left before breakfast. You were still sharing your location with the family account. You tracked my phone. You disappeared after speaking with a man who publicly accused you of a serious crime. Any mother would have been concerned. Concern does not require surveillance. Grace looked at Caleb. Give me every document. Elaine stepped between them. You will do no such thing. Caleb lifted the brown envelope. They belong with her now. They belong with the authorities, if they belong anywhere. Then we agree, Grace said. Elaine turned toward her. No, we do not. You are frightened and angry. That is exactly the state Caleb needs you in. He wants you to confuse confession with courage. Grace picked up Leah's photograph. What do you call making Marcus take my place? For the first time, Elaine's composure shifted. I call it the worst decision I ever had to make. You did not have to make it. You were 17. You had barely slept in days. You had discovered something about me that no child should have carried. You called Caleb while driving in heavy rain. and your life changed in one instant. Your father arrived, saw that you could not remember your own address, and understood what the truth would do to you. The truth would have held me responsible. The truth would have made you the permanent face of a tragedy before you were old enough to understand your choices. So Marcus became the face instead. Elaine glanced toward the diner. Marcus had worked for us for 11 years. Henry offered excellent counsel, financial security for his family, and the promise of leniency. He died in prison. That was not the outcome anyone expected. There should never have been an agreement. Elaine lowered her voice. You think morality remains clean when a family is about to lose everything. It does not. It becomes a series of doors, and every door closes on someone. You chose who stood outside. Elaine's eyes moved to Caleb. So did he. The words landed because they were true. Caleb had known Leah was his daughter and had still shaped Marcus's confession. No one in the room could claim innocence. Grace placed the photograph inside the envelope. I am taking these records. Elaine reached for it, but Grace stepped back. Do not touch me. The sentence stopped her mother more effectively than shouting. Henry has prepared a statement, Elaine said. It explains that Caleb manipulated recordings and exploited your history of anxiety. You will sign it this afternoon. Once the Senate committee understands that this is a personal attack, the story will lose momentum. You want me to call myself unstable so Dad can keep his federal nomination. We want to protect your privacy. Marcus lost his name. Leah lost her chance to tell the truth. Caleb sold his daughter's memory. Daniel has carried this since he was 16. What exactly has Dad built that matters more than all of that? Elaine's face hardened. Your father held this family together after your mistake. He held the story together. Grace walked past her into the diner. Outside, a black sedan waited beside her car. Henry sat in the rear seat. Daniel stood near the passenger door. Grace stopped beneath the red sign. You told her where I was, she said to Daniel. I thought she would explain. She explained everything except why you still protect them. Daniel looked toward Henry's sedan. Because I helped. I moved you and repeated the story to the police. Dad told me one mistake did not have to destroy 2 children. You are not 16 now. Daniel's expression tightened. You think walking into a prosecutor's office fixes this? Dad loses the nomination. Mom faces an investigation. The foundation may suspend programs. Marcus's family gets dragged through the news again. Leah becomes a headline instead of a person. There is no clean ending. There is no clean ending because all of you used 18 years to make the truth more expensive. Henry stepped from the sedan. Grace, get in the car. She did not move. I am taking the file to an attorney who has never worked for this family. Caleb compromised every document in that envelope. Then an independent attorney can decide what is usable. Henry approached until only a few feet separated them. You are reacting to fragments without understanding the full context. Then give me the full context. Henry glanced at Elaine. Something passed between them, silent and practiced. Elaine looked away first. What are you not telling me? Grace asked. Henry spoke carefully. The accident happened 2 weeks before the governor's office announced the shortlist for my first judicial appointment. What did that have to do with me? Elaine answered before Henry could. Nothing, she said. Then she looked at her husband, and years of obedience gave way to bitterness. It had everything to do with him. Henry's expression changed. Elaine. She ignored the warning. Your father did not bury the case only because he thought the truth would destroy you. He did it because he was 2 weeks away from the appointment that would make his career, and he knew your name on that police report would cost him the bench. Grace looked at her father and understood that every sacrifice he called love had also been calculated like a legal strategy. You let Marcus lose his freedom so your name could stay clean, she said. Henry glanced toward the diner windows. This is not the place. There was never going to be a place. There was only going to be another room where you controlled the doors. Elaine stood several feet away, her certainty gone. Daniel moved closer, but Grace could not tell whether he meant to support her or stop her. Henry lowered his voice. I protected you from a system that would have reduced your life to one terrible night. You protected your appointment. Both things can be true. Grace held the envelope tighter. Not when one of them required an innocent man to carry my name into prison. Caleb stepped forward. The 24 hours end tonight. Henry looked at him with contempt. You do not get to set the moral clock. You wrote the statement, negotiated the payment, and considered taking $2 million to disappear behind a confidentiality agreement. I know, Caleb said. That is why I am going with Grace. Going where? Daniel asked. First to independent counsel, Caleb replied. Then to the Connecticut Division of Criminal Justice. I will provide the recordings, the original file, and a sworn account of my role. Henry turned to Grace. Once you do this, you cannot control what happens next. That is the first honest thing anyone has said to me. By noon, Grace sat in a conference room 28 miles away with Rachel Bennett, a former federal prosecutor who had never represented the Whitakers. Caleb sat at the opposite end of the table. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later carrying a written timeline of the night Leah died. Elaine did not come. Henry sent attorneys with a statement calling the accusations incomplete and politically motivated. Grace pushed it aside. For 6 hours, she answered questions about uncertain memories and documents she had never been allowed to see. She did not ask Rachel to make her appear innocent. She asked her to make the record accurate. Caleb described how he revised Marcus Bell's statement, concealed Leah's journal, and allowed Henry to direct the family's account. Daniel admitted moving Grace into the passenger seat and repeating the story his parents gave him. Rachel arranged for the evidence to be delivered to state prosecutors with a documented chain of custody. By early evening, the state's attorney confirmed that a formal review had begun. The Senate Judiciary Committee postponed Henry's confirmation hearing pending examination of the allegations. The Whitaker Foundation's board placed senior leadership on administrative leave and announced an outside audit of the payment to Marcus's family. The consequences felt administrative, precise, and permanent. At 7:30 that evening, Grace stood in a small press room at Rachel's law firm. Henry called twice while she waited behind the curtain. She did not answer. Elaine sent one message. Whatever you say, remember that I am still your mother. Grace placed the phone face down. When she stepped to the podium, there was no applause. Daniel stood near the side wall. Caleb was still meeting with investigators, giving the account he should have given 18 years earlier. Grace placed her written statement on the podium, but did not look down. 18 years ago, I was driving on North Lake Road during heavy rain while emotionally distressed and distracted by a telephone call, she said. Leah Quinn was on that road. Marcus Bell was not driving my car. My family and Caleb Monroe helped create a false account that placed responsibility on him. I lived inside that account because the people I trusted taught me to mistake protection for truth. Grace named the payment of $500,000, the sealed clinic records, Daniel's role, Caleb's role, and finally her own. I was 17, confused, and later manipulated, but none of those facts erased that I was behind the wheel. I will cooperate fully without asking for special treatment. Marcus Bell's family deserves a corrected record. Leah Quinn deserves to be remembered as a person, not as a secret that powerful people managed. Grace looked into the nearest camera. Caleb Monroe has chosen to confess after 18 years. That choice matters, but it does not make him a hero. He was Leah's father, and he helped silence the truth about her. Remorse does not erase responsibility. It only begins it. My father said he saved me from being defined by one night. What he did was force Marcus Bell to be defined by it instead. My mother said she protected our family. What she protected was our ability to avoid consequences. Daniel and I were children when this began, but we are adults now, and adulthood means refusing to inherit a lie simply because it was built for us. After the statement, Grace answered no questions. Daniel followed her outside. Do you think they will forgive us? He asked. Grace knew he meant Ethan, Leah's relatives, and perhaps the public. They do not owe us forgiveness, she said. They only deserve the truth sooner. 6 months later, the court vacated Marcus Bell's conviction after the state's attorney joined a petition filed by Ethan. Henry resigned from the state bench, and his federal nomination was withdrawn while the investigation continued. Elaine moved out of the Greenwich estate and entered counseling, though Grace kept her distance. Daniel continued providing testimony and accepted that being 16 explained his choice but did not erase its consequences. Caleb surrendered his law license and cooperated with disciplinary and criminal investigations. Grace continued answering questions without asking for immunity. None of it restored Leah's future, Marcus's lost years, or the family. It did something smaller and more honest. They ended the agreement that everyone would keep pretending. On the first anniversary of the reopened case, Grace returned alone to Millie's place. Marjorie had placed Leah's photograph near the register beside a card describing her love of old country songs, strong coffee, and community college classes. There was no mention of the Whitakers or Caleb. Grace ordered coffee and sat by the window facing the road. For years, she had believed the truth would destroy her family. Sitting there, she finally understood that the family had been damaged the moment its most powerful members decided one person's future mattered more than another person's name. The truth had not destroyed them. It had only removed the walls that kept everyone from seeing the ruins.